Section 1 of Sherman's Military Lessons of the American Civil War, from his Memoirs. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Wales. Sherman's Military Lessons of the American Civil War, from his Memoirs, by William Tecumseh Sherman. Chapter 25. Conclusion. Military Lessons of the War, Section 1. Having thus recorded a summary of events, mostly under my own personal supervision, during the years from 1846 to 1865, it seems proper that I should add an opinion of some of the useful military lessons to be derived therefrom. That civil war, by reason of the existence of slavery, was apprehended by most of the leading statesmen of the half-century preceding its outbreak, is a matter of notoriety. General Scott told me on my arrival at New York, as early as 1850, that the country was on the eve of civil war, and the Southern politicians openly asserted that it was their purpose to accept as a casus belli the election of General Fremont in 1856. But, fortunately or unfortunately, he was beaten by Mr. Buchanan, which simply postponed its occurrence for 4 years. Mr. Seward had also publicly declared that no government could possibly exist half slave and half free, yet the government made no military preparation, and the Northern people generally paid no attention, took no warning of its coming, and would not realize its existence till Fort Sumter was fired on by batteries of artillery, handled by declared enemies, from the surrounding islands and from the city of Charleston. General Bragg, who certainly was a man of intelligence, and who in early life ridiculed 1,000 times in my hearing the threats of the people of South Carolina to secede from the Federal Union, said to me in New Orleans in February, 1861, that he was convinced that the feeling between the slave and free states had become so embittered that it was better to part in peace, better to part anyhow, and, as a separation was inevitable, that the South should begin at once, because the possibility of a successful effort was yearly lessened by the rapid and increasing inequality between the two sections, from the fact that all the European immigrants were coming to the Northern States and Territories, and none to the Southern. The slave population in 1860 was near 4 millions, and the money value thereof not far from $2,500 millions. Now, ignoring the moral side of the question, a cause that endangered so vast a moneyed interest was an adequate cause of anxiety and preparation, and the Northern leaders surely ought to have foreseen the danger and prepared for it. After the election of Mr. Lincoln in 1860, there was no concealment of the declaration and preparation for war in the South. In Louisiana, as I have related, men were openly enlisted, officers were appointed, and war was actually begun in January, 1861. The forts at the mouth of the Mississippi were seized and occupied by garrisons that hauled down the United States flag and hoisted that of the state. The United States arsenal at Baton Rouge was captured by New Orleans militia, its garrison ignominiously sent off, and the contents of the arsenal distributed. These were as much acts of war as was the subsequent firing on Fort Sumter, yet no public notice was taken thereof; and when months afterward I came North, I found not one single sign of preparation. It was for this reason, somewhat, that the people of the South became convinced that those of the North were pusillanimous and cowardly, and the Southern leaders were thereby enabled to commit their people to the war, nominally in defense of their slave property. Up to the hour of the firing on Fort Sumter in April, 1861, it does seem to me that our public men, our politicians, were blamable for not sounding the note of alarm. Then, when war was actually begun, it was by a call for 75,000 90-day men, I suppose to fill Mr. Seward's prophecy that the war would last but 90 days. The earlier steps by our political government were extremely wavering and weak, for which an excuse can be found in the fact that many of the Southern representatives remained in Congress, sharing in the public councils and influencing legislation.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?